The night I lost everything, an old man sat down beside me and said 5 words that changed my $280,000 fortune. But I'll tell you about that later. Because first, you need to understand how I ended up on that park bench, crying like a broken woman who no longer recognized her own reflection in the mirror. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It's going to help me continue to unburden myself. My name is Grace Thompson, and I am 68 years old. That April morning, in my brownstone in Lincoln Park, Chicago, I woke up as I always did, at 6 o'clock sharp, to the sound of the garbage truck rumbling down the street below. My routine was sacred, a fresh pot of dark roast coffee in the kitchen that smelled of comfort, while I checked my bank accounts on my phone to make sure the automatic transfers had gone through correctly. $2,000 for Michael and Jessica's rent in Logan Square, $500 for their monthly groceries, $100 for my daughter-in-law's cell phone bill. Every payment, every dollar, every sacrifice was my way of saying, I love you, please don't abandon me. I was wearing the same pink cotton nightgown my late husband Richard gave me 15 years ago, frayed at the edges but soft as a caress. My sheepskin slippers shuffled across the hardwood floors as I prepared the breakfast I would eat alone, as I had for the last 5 years since Michael moved out. The solid oak table where we used to eat as a family now held just one plate, one cup, one napkin folded with the care of someone who has no one else to make things pretty for. The phone rang at 9:30. It was Jessica, my daughter-in-law, with that sweet voice she only used when she needed something. Good morning, Grace. How are you today? I'm well, honey. Just planning to make my famous brisket for dinner tomorrow. You two are coming, right? I asked, though I already knew they'd find an excuse to cancel, as always. Oh, Grace, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. We won't be able to make it tomorrow. We have so much to organize for. Well, we'll tell you in person soon. A knot formed in my stomach. I hadn't seen my son in 3 weeks. 3 weeks of short phone calls, of, I'll call you back, Mom, of broken promises. Something was happening, and I, like the fool I had been my whole life, pretended not to notice. Is everything okay? Is Michael all right? Yes, he's perfect. It's just, it's better if we talk later. Hey, did the transfer for this month go through? It's just that the landlord... And there it was, the real reason for the call. As always. It went out yesterday, sweetie. Check your account. Perfect. Thanks, Grace. We love you so much. We love you so much. 3 words that sounded increasingly hollow, more mechanical, like a scratched record repeating a lie until it stopped hurting to hear it. I hung up the phone and stood in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by the silence that had filled my house since I became the widow who paid for company. The warm yellow walls that Richard had painted with such love now seemed pale, faded, like my own life. On the refrigerator were photos from birthdays, Christmases, baptisms, moments where I always appeared on the edges, holding gifts, paying bills, being useful but never central. That afternoon, I decided to take a trip to the mall on Michigan Avenue. I needed to buy a dress for some special occasion Jessica had vaguely mentioned. Something elegant, she'd said, for an important family celebration. Me, the dreamer, thought of a fancy dinner. Maybe a promotion for Michael at his accounting firm. Or perhaps they were pregnant and wanted to surprise me. At Nordstrom, a very kind saleswoman helped me find a champagne-colored silk dress with lace on the sleeves and a cut that flattered my figure. It cost $350, almost a quarter of my monthly retirement check. But I loved it so much, I didn't think twice. As I paid with my debit card, I imagined Michael's happy face seeing me so dressed up, so beautiful for his special event. The dress hung in my closet for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of waiting, of preparing my best smile, of planning which shoes to wear, of imagining conversations where my son would proudly introduce me to his friends. 2 weeks of illusion that would crumble like a sandcastle at the first touch of a wave. The call came on a Tuesday night. It was Michael. His voice strange, nervous. Mom, I need you to come over to Jessica's place tomorrow. We need to talk to you. Did something bad happen, son? No, it's nothing bad. Just come, okay? Around 7. I didn't sleep that night. Something in his tone unsettled me. I got up 5 times to check on the dress, to polish my black patent leather shoes, to rehearse the perfect proud mother smile in the mirror. By 6 in the morning, I was already awake, drinking coffee and counting the hours until I would see them. I arrived at their apartment in Logan Square at 7 sharp, a place I knew by heart because for 3 years, I had been the one paying the rent. I walked up the 2 flights of concrete stairs, breathing in the smell of home-cooked meals coming from other apartments, hearing the sounds of televisions and family conversations that reminded me how lonely my own house was. I knocked on the door, as I always did, softly and respectfully. "Coming!" Jessica shouted from inside. When she opened the door, my world changed forever. When she opened the door, she was wearing a white dress. Not just any white dress. It was the most beautiful wedding gown I had ever seen. Pearl satin, Chantilly lace, a train that spread out like a sigh on the tiled floor. A dress that cost over $4,000. I knew instantly because I had seen one just like it in the window of a boutique on Oak Street. "Grace, so good of you to come," she said with a strange smile, as if she were acting in a play where I didn't know my lines. Behind her, Michael appeared in a suit, an elegant black suit, a pearl gray silk tie, Italian shoes that shone like mirrors. He wore a white rose in his buttonhole, and his hair was slicked back with gel. He looked like a movie star, handsome and distant, like a stranger disguised as my son. "Mom," he said, not coming closer to give me a kiss as he usually did, "why don't you come in? We have something to tell you." My heart began to beat erratically. The living room was decorated with white flowers. There were crystal glasses on the coffee table, and in the corner, leaning against the wall, was a bridal bouquet still dripping water onto the floor. The air smelled of lilies and that expensive perfume Jessica wore on special occasions, the one I had given her for her last birthday. "Are you two going out?" I asked, trying to understand why they were so dressed up, why the house looked like the stage for a celebration to which I hadn't been invited. Jessica poured 3 glasses of red wine. Her hands trembled slightly, and she avoided my eyes. Michael stood by the window as if he wanted to escape through it. "Have a seat, Grace," she said, pointing to the armchair where I always sat when I visited, the same one where I had cried with joy when they told me they were getting engaged, where I had planned 1,000 details of a wedding I thought we would organize together. I sat down slowly, clutching my purse, with the horrible feeling that something was terribly wrong. The champagne silk dress I was wearing suddenly felt ridiculous, too elegant for a meeting that smelled like a farewell. "And what about the dress you bought for the wedding?" I asked with a trembling voice, as I tried to understand why I hadn't received an invitation, why I knew nothing about the preparations, why my son hadn't included me in the most important day of his life. Jessica took a sip of wine, took a deep breath, and looked at me with a twisted, almost mocking smile I had never seen on her before. "We got married yesterday, Grace. It was an intimate thing. Only special people came." Special people. 3 words that ripped the soul right out of me, that left me breathless, that turned my world into a place where I didn't belong. The wine spilled onto my skirt without me even noticing. My hands began to shake so hard that the glass slipped and fell onto the beige carpet, staining it red like an open wound. But I didn't move to clean it. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "Special people?" I repeated, each letter feeling like a knife in my throat. Me, who for 3 years paid their rent month after month, a punctual transfer on the 5th of every month, even when it meant I would eat beans and rice for the last week before my retirement check arrived. Me, who filled their refrigerator every time they ran out of money, carrying heavy bags on the L train because I didn't have a car, climbing 2 flights of stairs with aching knees but smiling because it was my way of showing I loved them. Me, who covered their medical emergencies, their credit card debts, their whims as a young couple who wanted to live like they were rich without being so. Me, who even bought the white dress Jessica was wearing right then, the one she had chosen with me 6 months ago, crying with emotion in the fitting room while I paid the $2,000 down payment without blinking. I wasn't special. I was the useful old woman, the walking wallet, the pensioner who signed checks and kept quiet. "And Michael, you didn't think of me?" I stammered, fixing my eyes on my son, who barely dared to look up from the floor. For the first time in the entire conversation, he spoke. His voice sounded like a scared child's, but also like a man who had made a decision with no turning back. "It was both our ideas, Mom. We wanted something small, without complications. No unnecessary expenses. Complications. I was a complication in my own son's life." "No unnecessary expenses?" I asked, my voice rising stronger than I expected. "Like the unnecessary expenses I've covered for 3 years? Like the $2,000 for the dress you're wearing? Like the $3,000 I spent on your engagement rings?" Jessica stood up abruptly, her white dress whispering against her legs like the flutter of a dove. "It's not like that, Grace. You've always been very good to us, but this was different. It was our moment, our decision, our moment, our decision." As if I were a stranger who had crept into their lives without permission, I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 68 years weighing on my tired bones. The champagne silk dress I had chosen with such care looked pathetic under the yellow light of their living room. I had imagined this moment so differently. Me, weeping with happiness in the front row, taking pictures, being the proud mother who hugs the newlyweds and tells emotional anecdotes during the toast. "You know what?" I said, and surprisingly my voice sounded calm. "You're right. It was your moment. Your decision. And what I do from now on will be my decision too." Michael finally looked me in the eye, and for a second, I saw a flicker of panic, as if he understood that something fundamental had just changed between us. "Mom, don't be angry. We can celebrate later, the 3 of us together." "No," I interrupted him. "You already celebrated. With the special people. I was just the one who paid the bills, right?" I walked to the door with what dignity I had left, though my legs were trembling and my heart was beating so hard I felt it would burst out of my chest. In the hallway mirror, I saw my reflection, an old woman in an expensive dress. Her eyes full of tears she refused to shed in front of them. "Grace, wait," Jessica called from behind me, but I had already opened the door. The cool night air hit my face like a liberating slap. "Congratulations," I said without turning around. "I hope you'll be very happy. Both of you." Alone. I walked down the stairs hearing their voices arguing above, but I no longer cared what they said. The champagne silk dress moved around me like a broken promise, and I walked through the streets of Logan Square towards the L station, an invisible woman who had just discovered she had been dead while living for years. That night, the champagne silk dress hung in my closet like a reminder of my own foolishness. Next to it, I put away the envelope with $5,000 I had saved to give them as a wedding gift. Money that would no longer be given. Love that would no longer be sold at a discount. For the first time in 3 years, I went to bed without checking my phone to confirm the automatic transfers were scheduled. For the first time in my adult life, I fell asleep wondering if I had truly been a good mother, or just a frightened woman who confused need with love, money with affection, sacrifice with stupidity. The first call came 3 days after the secret wedding. It was 7 in the morning, and I was making coffee when the phone rang. The caller ID showed Jessica's number, but I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 minutes later, it rang again. This time it was Michael. I didn't answer that either. For the first time in 3 years, I hadn't made the monthly rent transfer. For the first time in my life as a mother, I had chosen my own pain over my son's needs, and it felt horrible and liberating at the same time, like pulling out a thorn that had been embedded in your flesh for so long it had become a part of you. The phone kept ringing all week. 23 missed calls from Michael, 17 from Jessica, and at night, unknown numbers that would hang up when I answered with a voice hoarse from crying. I knew it was them, desperate, trying to find a way to reach me. But for the first time in decades, I was in control of something. My availability. My sister, Susan, showed up on Friday afternoon without warning. She had the spare key I gave her years ago for emergencies, and she appeared in my kitchen as if it were her own house, carrying 2 grocery bags and wearing that martyr-like expression she put on when she came to save me from myself. "Can you tell me what's wrong with you, Grace?" she said, emptying the bags onto my table. "Michael called me crying. He says you're not answering the phone, you haven't paid the rent, that you're acting very strange." I watched her arrange tomatoes, onions, and peppers on my wooden table. Susan was 59, 9 years younger than me, but she had always spoken to me as if she were my mother instead of my younger sister. Divorced twice, no children. She lived off her second ex-husband's alimony and the loans I gave her whenever she got into financial trouble. "Did he tell you why I wasn't answering the calls?" I asked, not moving from my chair. "He said you had a misunderstanding about the wedding, that it was spontaneous, that they didn't have time to tell you. But Grace, that's no reason to punish the boy like this. Punish, as if defending myself were a crime, as if setting boundaries were cruelty. A misunderstanding?" I repeated, feeling anger rise in my chest like boiling water. "Is spending $2,000 on a wedding dress and not inviting the person who paid for it a misunderstanding? Is telling me they only invited special people a misunderstanding?" Susan sighed and sat across from me with the exaggerated patience adults use with stubborn children. "Oh, sister, you know how young people are. They're impulsive. They don't think things through. But Michael loves you. He's always been a good son." "A good son?" I interrupted. "A good son who takes my money month after month and excludes me from the most important thing in his life? A good son who hasn't visited me in a month? Who only calls when he needs money? Who treats me like an ATM with feelings?" "Don't exaggerate, Grace. Michael has expenses. He's starting his marriage. He needs support. That's what mothers do." There it was again. That word, needs. As if my son's needs were more important than my own dignity. As if being a mother meant becoming a bottomless pit where he could dump his problems without ever giving anything back. "And what do I need, Susan? Have you ever wondered what I need?" My sister looked at me as if I had gone crazy. To her, to everyone, mothers didn't have needs of their own. Mothers were resources, not people. "You need your family, Grace. You need Michael to be okay, to be happy. And what about my happiness? My emotional stability? My money?" Susan stood up abruptly and started putting the vegetables in my refrigerator with sharp movements, as if she were angry with me for asking uncomfortable questions. "Look, I don't know what's gotten into you, but Michael is your only son. When you're older, when you're sick, he's going to be the only thing you have. Aren't you afraid of being left alone?" There it was. The fear that had controlled my life for years. The terror of loneliness that had turned me into a woman who bought love with bank transfers. The fear of growing old with no one to care for me, which had made me tolerate disrespect, humiliation, and exclusion just to keep my son close. "But I'm already alone, Susan," I said softly. "I've been alone for years. He only comes around when he needs money. He only calls when he has problems. I already live alone. I just pay for the illusion of not being." My sister was quiet for the first time since she arrived. She closed the refrigerator door slowly and leaned against it, looking at me with an expression I couldn't interpret. "So what are you going to do? Let them lose the apartment? Let them end up on the street? I'm going to let them solve their problems like the adults they are. I'm going to stop being their free life insurance. I'm going to start living for me." You're making a mistake, Grace. A very big mistake." When Susan left that afternoon, taking her disappointment and unsolicited advice with her, I sat in my kitchen watching the sun set through the window. The house was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock that Richard had fixed shortly before he died. But for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like peace. The next day, I went to the bank. It was Saturday morning, and there weren't many people at the Chase branch on Clark Street. The manager, Mr. Robert Lewis, had known me for a decade, because that's where I cashed my retirement check and managed my modest savings. He was an older man, with a graying mustache and courteous manners, who always treated me with respect. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. How can I help you?" "I want to cancel all my automatic transfers," I said without preamble. "All of them. And I want to change all my passwords and activate security alerts for any movement in my accounts." Mr. Lewis looked at me, surprised. For years, he had seen my monthly transfers. He knew I supported my son and his wife. He had processed loans and advances I had requested when they had emergencies. "Are you sure, Mrs. Thompson? You've been helping them for years." "Did something happen?" "I had been helping them for years," I corrected him. "Not anymore. I want this money to serve me, not someone who considers me a nuisance." I signed all the necessary papers, changed my security codes, and set up alerts that would notify me by text every time someone tried to access my accounts. For the first time in decades, my finances were completely private, completely mine. And what if they need something urgent? A medical emergency? Some unforeseen event? Mr. Lewis asked as he processed the changes. They can do what everyone else does. Get a loan, find a second job, sell something. They can figure it out like adults. I left the bank feeling strangely light, as if I had taken off a heavy coat I had been wearing in the middle of summer. I had regained control over my money, over my decisions, over my life. It was terrifying and exciting at the same time. That night, I cooked a dinner just for myself. Salmon with roasted vegetables, something I never made when I expected Michael to visit because he didn't like fish. I set the table with my good china, the set I inherited from my mother and only used on special occasions. I lit candles, opened a bottle of red wine I had been saving since Christmas, and put on some Frank Sinatra. I sat alone in my dining room, wearing a navy blue dress I hadn't worn in years, with light makeup and freshly washed hair. For the first time in years, I had gotten dressed up for myself, not to impress anyone else. The phone rang 3 times during dinner. I ignored it all 3 times. When I finished eating, I raised my wine glass to the portrait of Richard hanging on the wall. A toast to me, I said to his photograph, to starting to live instead of just surviving. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since the secret wedding. I dreamed I was in a garden full of flowers, but for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to arrive. I was whole, I was alone, and I was okay. On Monday morning, I was watering my plants on the patio when I heard the doorbell ring, not once, but 5 times in a row, with the desperation of someone who knows the person is inside but refuses to open. I immediately recognized the pattern. 2 short rings, a pause, 3 long rings. It was Michael's particular way of ringing since he was a child, when he came home late from school and knew I was angry. I continued watering my red geraniums as if I hadn't heard anything. The water fell on the dry soil with a calming sound that helped me stay composed. I was wearing a floral cotton robe, my old slippers, and my hair was up in a messy bun. I looked exactly like what I was, a 68-year-old woman who had finally decided to live at her own pace. "Mom, I know you're in there. Please open the door." Michael's voice sounded broken, desperate. There was something different in his tone, something I had never heard before. Real panic. It wasn't the annoyance of someone having to solve a minor problem, but the genuine fear of someone who had just discovered their safety net had disappeared. "Grace," Jessica yelled from the street. "We just want to talk to you. We can explain everything." I left the hose on the planters and walked to the living room window overlooking the street. I peeked through the lace curtain and saw them. Michael dressed in his work clothes, his suit wrinkled and tie crooked, as if he had slept in them. Jessica was wearing jeans and a white blouse, no makeup, with deep dark circles under her eyes, and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. They looked tired, worried, vulnerable. For a moment, my maternal instinct screamed at me to open the door, to hug them, to ask what they needed and how I could help. 43 years of being a mother don't just disappear overnight. But then I remembered her white dress, her mocking smile, her knife-like words. Special people. And my hand moved away from the doorknob. They rang for another 20 minutes. Then I heard their voices arguing in low tones, but loud enough for me to hear from my window. "Now what are we going to do?" Jessica asked in a hysterical voice. "The landlord called me yesterday. He says if we don't pay this week, he's evicting us." I know. Let me think." "Think about what, Michael? Your mom was the one who helped us with everything. Without her, we have no way of coming up with $2,000 every month. She has to understand. She's my mom. She's just hurt, but she'll come around." How wrong he was. I had already understood everything. I had understood that to them, I wasn't a person, but a resource. I had understood that my unconditional love had become their financial security. I had understood that they had turned me into the ATM mother, available 24 hours to solve their problems, but not important enough to be included in their joys. They left after half an hour, but they returned that same afternoon. This time, they came with reinforcements. Susan and Brenda, my lifelong neighbor, that nosy woman who always had opinions about everyone else's life, but could never manage her own. Grace, open up, Susan yelled. Don't be stubborn. Let's talk like civilized people. This time I did open the door, but not to let them in. I stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance with my body, looking at all of them with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. What do you want? Michael stepped forward, his eyes red and his hands trembling. He looked like a lost child, like the little boy who used to run to me when he got hurt at the park. But he was no longer a child. He was a 32-year-old man who had decided I wasn't special enough for his wedding. Mom, please. We need to talk. I know you're hurt about the wedding, but we can fix it. We can have another ceremony, with your friends, with the family. A consolation ceremony? I asked. So the old lady doesn't feel bad? It's not like that. It's just that everything happened so fast, we didn't plan anything. You planned enough to rent the hall, buy the flowers, invite your friends. You planned enough for everything except including the woman who paid for your wedding dress. Jessica started to cry, big, dramatic tears that rolled down her makeup-free cheeks. There was something calculated in her crying, something rehearsed, as if she had been practicing in front of the mirror the best way to look sorry. Grace, I love you like my own mom. You know that. It's just, my parents wanted it to be something small for family. They paid for everything, and they said they preferred something intimate. There it was, the first lie. Jessica's parents lived in a small town in Kentucky and barely had enough to cover their own expenses. I knew this because she herself had told me they worked at a local market, but I let her keep lying. And was my $2,000 a month also an intimate family affair? Grace, don't be like that. Brenda chimed in with her shrill voice. The kids made a mistake, but that's no reason to leave them on the street. Michael is your only son, and I was his only mom. But that didn't stop him from treating me like I was invisible. We never treated you like you were invisible, Michael exploded. We've included you in everything. You come for dinner on Sundays. We talk on the phone. We tell you about our lives. You included me in everything? In planning your wedding? In the decision of where you would live? In your plans for the future? Or did you only include me when you needed money? The silence that followed my question was so heavy you could almost touch it. Michael looked at Jessica. Jessica looked at Susan. Susan looked at Brenda. None of them had an answer because they all knew I was right. Look, Grace, Susan finally said, I understand you're hurt, but think about it. Are you going to ruin your relationship with your son over a tantrum? Are you going to let them become homeless because of your pride? My pride. As if having dignity were a flaw. As if defending myself were a whim. It's not my pride, Susan. It's my emotional survival. For 3 years I've been their life insurance, their plan B, their personal ATM. But when the most important moment of their lives came, I wasn't special enough to be there. But you can be there now, Michael shouted. We can start over. We can do things right. Start over? On what foundation? On the promise that the next time you get married, you'll actually invite me? Jessica took a step closer, her hands clasped as if in prayer. Grace, I'm begging you. We're young. We made mistakes. But we need you. Without you, we can't. That's the problem, I interrupted her. You need me, but you don't respect me. You look for me when you have problems, but you discard me when you have celebrations. I'm not a person to you. I'm a service. That's not true, isn't it? Then tell me, Jessica, when was the last time you called just to see how I was? When was the last time you came to visit without asking for anything? When was the last time you asked me what I needed? Another silence, heavier than the last. And you, Michael, I continued, looking at my son. When was the last time you told me you loved me without it being right after I helped you financially? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling? What I wanted to do with my life? If I was happy? I saw Michael's eyes well up with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, from someone who didn't understand why things weren't working the way they always had. Mom, you know I love you. No, Michael. You love what I do for you. You love my money, my availability, my willingness to solve your problems without asking questions. But me, the woman I am, my feelings, my dignity, you don't love that. You don't even see that. I closed the door slowly, without slamming it. I heard them continue to talk outside for several minutes. How Susan yelled at Michael for being ungrateful. how Brenda said I was going through a late-life crisis, and that's why I was acting this way. I heard their voices and footsteps fade away, a car start, and disappear into the afternoon noise. I poured myself a glass of water in the kitchen and sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window where the afternoon light streamed in. My plants looked beautiful after being watered, green and fresh, full of life. I thought about the irony. I had watered these plants every day for years, cared for them, fed them, and now they were blooming beautifully in their pots. But when I watered my son with love and money for decades, the result was a man who didn't know how to value the one who raised him. Maybe the mistake was watering them too much. Maybe I had been so good at giving them everything they needed that they never learned to appreciate the effort it took. That night, for the first time in weeks, the phone didn't ring. The house was so quiet I could hear my own breathing, the beat of my heart, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But it was no longer a silence that scared me. It was a silence that brought me peace. It had taken me 68 years to learn that being alone was not the same as being abandoned, and that sometimes chosen solitude was far more dignified than purchased company. A week after the last confrontation at my door, I was making breakfast when I heard the sound of keys in the lock. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I heard voices in the entrance of my house. Voices I knew very well but had no right to be there. I walked out of the kitchen with my coffee cup in hand and found them in my own living room. Michael, Jessica, and an older man in a gray suit whom I didn't know. They had entered my house as if it were theirs, as if I were the intruder in my own home. "What are you doing here?" I asked, feeling adrenaline surge through my body. Michael had the keys in his hand, the keys I had given him years ago for emergencies, for when he needed to water my plants if I went on a trip, for when he wanted to visit and surprise me with something nice. I never imagined he would use them to violate my privacy this way. "Mom, calm down," he said, pocketing the keys as if they were his. "We came because we're worried about you. You've been acting very strange lately. You might be confused." "Confused?" I repeated, setting my cup on the coffee table with hands that trembled with indignation. "Confused because I no longer want to support you? Confused because I decided I deserve respect?" The man in the gray suit cleared his throat and stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was about 50, with gelled back hair and an attitude that screamed, "cheap lawyer." The kind of professional who specializes in taking advantage of dysfunctional families and vulnerable seniors. "Mrs. Thompson, allow me to introduce myself. I'm attorney Gus Herrera. Your son and daughter-in-law have retained my services because they are very concerned about your well-being." "My well-being?" I asked, looking at Michael with a mixture of disbelief and contempt I never thought I'd feel for my own son. "You're worried about my well-being now? After excluding me from your wedding?" "Ma'am, I understand there have been family misunderstandings," the lawyer continued in the slick voice of a used car salesman. "But what concerns us is your recent behavior. Impulsively canceling automatic transfers, isolating yourself from your family, making erratic financial decisions." "Erratic? Is it erratic to decide how I spend my own money?" Jessica, who had been silent until now, approached me with that look of false concern I knew so well. "Grace, we know you're going through a difficult time. Sometimes older people what?" I interrupted. "Go crazy when they decide to stop giving away their money?" The lawyer opened a briefcase he was carrying and took out a folder full of documents. He placed them on my coffee table as if it were his office, as if he had the right to turn my living room into his workspace. "Mrs. Thompson, we've prepared some documents that could make things easier. A power of attorney that would allow your son to manage your finances while you recover from this episode. It would only be temporary until you feel better." "Episode?" I asked, feeling rage boil in my chest. "My dignity is an episode?" "Mom, it's just to help you," Michael insisted. "So you don't have to worry about paying bills, about managing money. I would take care of everything, just until you get better." There it was, the perfect trap. They wanted to declare me incompetent to get their hands on my money, my pension, everything I had managed to build over my working years. And they presented it as a favor, as if it were for my own good. The lawyer offered me a gold pen, as if it were a prize instead of an instrument to sign away my own financial freedom. "We just need your signature here, ma'am. It's a very simple process." I took the documents and glanced through them. They were pages and pages of legalese. But I understood enough to know that if I signed them, Michael would have total control over my bank accounts, my pension, my house. Everything I had worked for over 40 years would become his to manage. "You know what?" I said, holding them up. "You're right. These documents will solve everything." And I tore them up, page by page, slowly, looking each of them in the eye as I destroyed their plan. The sound of ripping paper filled the silence of my living room like a symphony of liberation. "Mom!" Michael yelled. "What are you doing?" "I'm making the sanest decision of my life." The lawyer stood up abruptly, his face red with indignation. "Ma'am, this is very unwise. Your son is only trying to help you. My son wants my money, and you want your cut of my savings. But do you know what you're both going to get? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." I walked to the front door and opened it wide. "Get out of my house. Now. And Michael, give me those keys." "Mom, you can't do this." "The keys!" I yelled, surprising myself with the force of my own voice. Michael approached slowly, his face like a child who had just been scolded. He placed the keys in my outstretched hand, and for a moment our eyes met. I saw confusion in his gaze, fear too, but what I didn't see was remorse. I saw no understanding of what he had done to me. I only saw frustration that his plan had failed. "This isn't over," the lawyer said as he packed his things. "There are other ways to protect senior citizens from their own impulsive decisions." "Other ways like what?" I asked. "Like filing a petition to have you declared mentally incompetent. If you won't accept help voluntarily, we can seek a court order to force you." The words hit me like a cold slap. A lawsuit. They wanted to take me to court to declare me crazy, incompetent, to legally strip me of the right to manage my own life. "Are you threatening me?" "We're informing you of your options," the lawyer replied with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. When they left, I stood in my shattered living room, surrounded by shredded pieces of paper that looked like confetti from a bitter celebration. My hands were shaking so much, I had to sit in my favorite armchair to keep from falling. A petition for mental incompetence. My own son was willing to declare me insane before a judge to get my money. The child I had raised, fed, and educated with enormous sacrifices now saw me as an obstacle to his financial well-being. That afternoon, I called my doctor, Dr. Evans, who had been my physician for 15 years. I explained the situation and asked him to run every test necessary to prove I was in perfect mental health. Memory tests, cognitive screenings, psychological evaluations, everything I might need to defend myself in court. "Grace," he told me after the examination, "you are in perfect mental condition. In fact, I've never seen you so lucid and determined. What you're doing isn't madness, it's emotional survival." His words gave me the strength I needed for the next step. The following day, I went to find the best elder law attorney in all of Chicago. I was referred to Alexander Vance, a 60-year-old man who specialized in defending seniors from financial and family abuse. His office was in the Loop, in an elegant building that smelled of polished wood and experience. "Mrs. Thompson," he said after listening to my entire story, "what you're describing is a classic case of financial and emotional abuse. And now they're trying to use the legal system to complete the theft." I showed him all the documents I had saved, the bank statements proving my monthly transfers, the receipts for the expensive gifts I had bought them, the proof that I had even paid for her wedding dress. "How much money do you estimate you've given them over these past 3 years?" he asked. I did the math in my head. $2,000 a month for rent for 36 months, plus the groceries, plus the medical emergencies, plus the gifts, plus the dress, plus the loans they never paid back. "Over $100,000, I replied, surprised by the figure myself. "And they excluded you from their wedding because you weren't special enough," he said, shaking his head. "Ma'am, this isn't just morally despicable. This is criminally abusive." He explained that we could file a countersuit for financial abuse, that we could demand the repayment of all the money I had loaned them, that we could even request a restraining order to stop them from harassing me. "But I must also warn you," he continued, that these types of lawsuits can be very emotionally difficult. They will try to paint you as a vengeful woman, as an unnatural mother who is abandoning her son out of spite. And what do you think? I asked him. I think you are a woman who got tired of being treated like an ATM with feelings. And you have every right in the world to defend your dignity. That night, I signed the retainer for Mr. Vance to represent me. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. I had a plan, I had an advocate, and I had the certainty that I was no longer alone in this battle. But most importantly, I had stopped feeling guilty for defending myself. I was no longer the mother begging for love in exchange for money. I was now a woman who had decided she deserved respect and who was willing to fight for it. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a court officer who knocked on my door with the cold formality of the law. The manila envelope contained official documents with seals and signatures that turned my family nightmare into a legal proceeding. Michael had followed through on his threat. He was suing to have me declared mentally incompetent. State of Illinois, Circuit Court of Cook County. Mrs. Grace Thompson is hereby summoned to a hearing for the determination of mental capacity petitioned by her son, Michael Thompson, who alleges that the respondent exhibits erratic behavior that poses a risk to her assets and well-being. I read the document 3 times, each word stabbing my chest like shards of glass. My own son had put it in writing, before a judge, that I was crazy, that I needed someone else to control my life because I was incapable of doing it myself, that I was a danger to myself. Mr. Vance had prepared our defense meticulously. We had the medical exams proving my perfect mental state, the bank statements proving the systematic financial abuse, and even recordings I had made of the threatening calls that continued to come to my phone each night. But as the court date drew closer, the heavier my soul felt. It wasn't just the fear of losing, though that terrified me. It was the deep pain of knowing that my relationship with my son had come to this. A courtroom where he would try to prove I was insane, and I would have to prove he was an abuser. 3 days before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I got up at 3 in the morning and went for a walk through the empty streets of my neighborhood. Chicago never completely sleeps. But at that hour, there's a different kind of quiet, as if the city is resting before facing another day of chaos. I walked aimlessly, past houses where families slept together, where parents and children loved each other unconditionally, where no one had to prove their sanity before a court. The streetlights cast yellow circles of light on the cracked pavement, and my footsteps echoed in the solitude like the ticking of a giant clock. I ended up at the local park without planning to. It was a small place, with old iron benches and a scruffy lawn where some neighbors walked their dogs during the day. At this hour, it was completely empty, except for the stray cats slinking through the bushes. I sat on a bench under a streetlight that flickered intermittently, as if it shared my exhaustion. I took the court summons from my purse and read it again, trying to understand how I had gotten to this point. Where had I failed as a mother? At what point did the little boy who used to hug me when he had nightmares turn into the man who was now accusing me of being crazy? The tears came without warning, silent but plentiful, rolling down my cheeks like rivers of salt, carrying decades of accumulated pain. I cried for the mother I had been, for the woman I had become, for the years lost buying a love that was never real. I cried for the loneliness I had tried to fill with bank transfers, for the dignity I had sacrificed on the altar of my fear of abandonment. "Are you all right, ma'am?" The voice startled me. I hadn't heard anyone approach, but there he was, an elderly man, perhaps in his 80s, with a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows over his wrinkled face. He carried a polished wooden cane and wore a gray suit that had seen better days, but still retained a natural elegance. "Pardon me for bothering you," he continued in a slow voice, "but I saw you from across the park and was concerned. A lady shouldn't be out here alone at this hour." "I'm fine," I lied, wiping away tears with the back of my hand. "Just needed some fresh air." He gestured to the bench with his cane, silently asking for permission. I nodded, and he sat down beside me with the care of someone who had learned to value every movement of his aging body. "You know," he said after a few minutes of silence, "I've been where you are. Not exactly, but in that darkness where you feel like everything you've built is falling apart." I didn't answer. but I didn't get up to leave either. There was something about his presence that was calming, like a grandfather who had appeared to watch over me in my most vulnerable moment. My son sued me too, he continued, 15 years ago. Said I couldn't manage my finances anymore, that I needed help. The truth was, he needed my money to save his failing business. I looked at him, surprised. It was as if he had read my mind, as if he knew my story without me having told him. What happened? I asked. I lost everything. The house, the savings, the relationship with him. I was left with a meager pension and a rented room. I thought it was the end of the world. And it wasn't? He smiled. And in his smile, I saw decades of wisdom earned through hard knocks. It was the end of a world, but not the world. It was the end of the version of myself I had built around being useful to others. It was the end of the lie that love can be bought with sacrifices. His words resonated in my chest like the bells of a distant church. But you must feel very lonely, I said. Do you know what the difference was between being alone and feeling free? He asked, turning to look at me directly. When you're alone because someone else decided you're not worth their time, that hurts. But when you choose your own solitude over accepting disrespect, that's called dignity. We sat in silence as his words settled into my soul like seeds in fertile ground. But don't you miss your son? I insisted. I miss the son I thought I had. But that son never really existed. Only my need to believe he existed did. The streetlight continued to flicker above our heads, creating a hypnotic rhythm that accompanied our conversation. In the distance, the city's night sounds carried on. Distant sirens, the hum of traffic, life continuing its course while the two of us, two strangers united by family pain, shared our wounds in an empty park. I have my hearing tomorrow, I finally told him. I know. How do you know? Because I recognize that look. It's the look of someone who is about to fight for their soul. He took a small, worn leather notebook from his jacket pocket and tore out a page. He wrote something with an old-fashioned fountain pen and handed me the paper. When you're there, in that courtroom, when your son tries to convince the judge that you're crazy, remember these words. I unfolded the paper under the flickering light. In an elegant but trembling script were 5 words. You are still the owner. I don't understand, I said. You will, he replied, getting to his feet with the help of his cane. Remember, they can take the money, the house, even the relationship, but they can't take who you truly are. But what good is owning something if that something is worthless to everyone else? He stopped before walking away and looked at me with eyes that shone like stars in the darkness. You are still the owner of your truth, of your dignity, of the decision to not accept crumbs when you deserve a feast, of the freedom to say enough when others expect you to say thank you. And that, ma'am, no one can take from you, not even a judge. He walked away slowly down the park path, his silhouette fading into the shadows until he disappeared completely. I remained on the bench, holding the paper with his 5 words as if it were a magic talisman. You are still the owner. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel sadness. I felt something I had forgotten existed, hope. Not the hope that everything would turn out the way I wanted, but the hope that no matter what happened in that courtroom, I would walk out of there as the same woman who had decided she deserved respect. I returned home as the dawn painted pink streaks across the city sky. I tucked the paper into my Bible, between the pages of Psalm 23, and for the first time in months, I slept deeply. I dreamed I was in a huge garden, full of flowers of every color, and I was walking alone on paths of white stone. But in this dream, being alone didn't scare me. It brought me peace, because I had finally understood the difference between loneliness and freedom. When I woke up, I knew I was ready for the hearing, not because I was necessarily going to win, but because I had already won something more important. I had won myself back. The morning of the hearing, I woke up with a strange calm, as if I had slept for years and was finally rested enough to face anything. I bathed slowly, choosing each item of clothing with care. A navy blue dress that made me look elegant but not pretentious, low, comfortable shoes, and my mother's pearl necklace. I wanted to look like what I was, a dignified, sane woman who was the owner of herself. The circuit court was downtown, a gray 1970s building that smelled of old paper and disinfectant. I arrived half an hour early, accompanied by Mr. Vance, who carried a briefcase full of evidence proving my mental stability and the financial abuse I had suffered. "Are you ready, Mrs. Thompson?" he asked as we climbed the stairs to the courtroom. "More than I've ever been," I replied, touching the folded piece of paper in my purse. The old man's 5 words that had become my mantra. But nothing had prepared me for what I saw when I entered the room. Sitting next to Michael was my sister Susan. My sister, the one person in the world I still trusted, was there to testify against me, to help have me declared incompetent. "You too?" I stammered, feeling the world tilt dangerously beneath my feet. Susan looked down, unable to meet my eyes. She was wearing a formal black dress I had never seen before, as if she were going to a funeral. Mine, perhaps. "I just want to help you, Grace," she murmured without conviction. "I just want you to be well taken care of." Well taken care of. As if I were a sick pet that needed to be handed over to someone more responsible. Michael's lawyer, the same Gus Herrera who had been in my house, approached with a shark smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. I hope you can understand this is for your own good." I didn't answer him. I sat in my place next to Mr. Vance and waited for the show to begin. The show where my own son would try to convince a judge that I had lost my mind. The judge was a man in his 60s, with gray hair and a serious expression, who reviewed the files with the meticulousness of someone used to making life-changing decisions. His name was Judge Robert Stevens, and from the moment he entered the room, I knew he wouldn't be easily impressed by either side. "This court is now in session," he announced. "We are here to determine the mental capacity of Mrs. Grace Thompson, at the request of her son, Michael Thompson, who alleges that his mother is exhibiting erratic behavior that puts her assets and well-being at risk." Herrera stood up with the confidence of someone who believed he had the case won. "Your Honor, my client is deeply concerned about his mother. In recent months, Mrs. Thompson has shown drastic personality changes. She has cut off all communication with her family, canceled automatic transfers she had been making religiously for years, isolated herself socially, and has refused the help her son has offered." Every word was technically true, but it sounded completely distorted. It was like describing someone who stops giving money to thieves as a person who has developed antisocial behaviors toward financial transactions. "Furthermore," Herrera continued, "Mrs. Thompson has destroyed important legal documents and has expressed paranoia toward professionals who only wanted to help her." The judge looked directly at me. "Mrs. Thompson, is it true that you destroyed legal documents?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied in a clear voice. "I destroyed documents that would have stripped me of control over my own finances without my informed consent." "And is it true that you cut off communication with your family?" "I cut off communication with people who excluded me from the most important moments of their lives, but expected me to continue paying their expenses." The judge took notes without changing his expression. Herrera called his first witness, Michael. My son walked to the stand with uncertain steps. He looked tired, nervous, younger than his 32 years. For a moment, I felt the maternal urge to protect him, to tell him everything would be okay. But I remembered the old man's words and kept my hands still in my lap. "Mr. Thompson, please describe your mother's recent behavior." "My mom was always a very generous person, very family-oriented," Michael began, his voice trembling. "But a few months ago, she changed completely. She became cold, calculating. She stopped helping us financially. She won't answer our calls. She shut the door of her house on us. She's not the woman who raised me." "And do you believe these changes represent a mental deterioration?" "Yes, Your Honor. My mother has never acted like this. Something is wrong with her." It was Mr. Vance's turn for cross-examination. "Mr. Thompson, how much money has your mother given you over the last 3 years?" Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I haven't kept an exact count." "I have. Over $100,000. Does it seem to you that someone who is mentally incompetent could manage those amounts with the precision shown in these bank statements?" "Well, she was always good with numbers." "And when was the last time you visited your mother without asking for money?" Silence. "When was the last time you invited her to dinner, asked her how she was feeling, or bought her a gift with your own money? We loved her very much. Please answer the question. Michael couldn't answer because there was no answer. The judge took more notes. Then, Susan testified, watching my own sister describe my strange behaviors was like watching my own funeral. She spoke of my isolation, my refusal to accept help, my obsession with money. And do you believe your sister needs professional help? Herrera asked. I think she needs someone to take care of her, Susan replied. She's alone, she's getting older, and she's making decisions that aren't normal for her. When it was Mr. Vance's turn, the strategy changed completely. Mrs. Morales, how much money has your sister loaned you over the past 5 years? Susan turned pale. That's not relevant. Please answer the question. Around $10,000, maybe more. And how much have you paid back? My circumstances, I was going to pay her back. Nothing? You've paid back nothing? No. And does it seem to you that a mentally incompetent person would continue to lend you money that you don't repay? The silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But then, something happened that no one expected. Mr. Vance walked over to his table and took out a small recorder. Your Honor, I have a recording that was made 2 weeks ago, when the petitioners were unaware they were being recorded. My heart stopped. I didn't know what recording he was talking about. Proceed, the judge said. Michael's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. We have to get this handled before the old woman changes the will. If we can get her declared incompetent, we can manage all her money. Jessica says her cousin works at the courthouse and can help us get the right judge. Jessica's voice followed. And your Aunt Susan is going to testify that she's crazy, right? The voice of Susan, my sister, my own blood. Yes, I already talked to him. He's going to say Grace is paranoid and isolating herself. Between the 3 of us, we can convince the judge. The silence that followed was absolute. The judge stood up, his face transformed by an expression of pure outrage. Order! He shouted, though no one was speaking. Are you telling me this petition is a conspiracy to defraud Mrs. Thompson? Michael had turned white as a sheet. Tears were streaming down Susan's cheeks, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of terror at being caught. Your Honor, that recording? We don't know where it came from, Herrera stammered. Silence, the judge roared. This is not only morally despicable, it is criminal. I am ordering an immediate investigation for attempted fraud, conspiracy, and coercion. He addressed Michael directly. Young man, you are not only a disgrace as a son, you are a criminal. And you, Mrs. Morales, are an accomplice to an attempted theft against your own sister. Then he looked at me, and his expression softened completely. Mrs. Thompson, this entire court owes you an apology. You are not only in perfect mental health, but you have shown extraordinary strength in defending yourself against this systematic abuse. I couldn't speak. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of liberation, of vindication, of the peace that comes when someone finally sees your truth. The petition for incompetence is hereby dismissed with prejudice, the judge continued. Furthermore, I order that criminal proceedings be initiated against the petitioners for fraud, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy. Michael staggered to his feet. Mom, But I was no longer listening. I was thinking of the old man's 5 words. You are still the owner of my truth, the owner of my dignity, the owner of my freedom to say enough when others expected me to say thank you. I walked out of that courthouse the same woman who had walked in, but now the whole world could see it. A woman who had chosen her own dignity over the fear of abandonment. A woman who had discovered that being alone with respect was infinitely better than being accompanied with contempt. The old man was right. I was still the owner of everything that truly mattered. 6 months after the trial, I was sitting on the terrace of my new apartment in Wicker Park, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink as I savored a glass of red wine that I had chosen myself, without asking anyone if it was too expensive or appropriate for a woman my age. The apartment was small but bright, with large windows that let in the afternoon light and plants I had bought at a local farmer's market, just because I liked their colors. For the first time in decades, I was living exactly how I wanted to live. I had sold the brownstone in Lincoln Park, that house full of memories of a happy marriage and a motherhood that I now understood had been more sacrifice than love. The money from the sale had allowed me to buy this apartment with cash and still have a considerable amount left over, which I had deposited into an account that only I controlled, with passwords that only I knew, for expenses that only I decided upon. The criminal case against Michael, Jessica, and Susan was moving slowly, as such cases often do. Michael had lost his job when his company found out he was being prosecuted for fraud. Jessica had moved back to her parents' home in Kentucky, taking with her the shame of being caught in such a miserable conspiracy. Susan had tried to call me several times, but I had changed my phone number and left no way to be contacted. It wasn't revenge. It was emotional survival. That November afternoon, as I was reading a novel I had bought at a local bookstore, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and in these past months, I had learned to enjoy my solitude without waiting for visits that might complicate my peace. I opened the door to find a little girl, about 8 years old, with curly hair and the wide eyes of someone who still believes the world is fundamentally good. "Are you Mrs. Thompson?" she asked with the formality of well-behaved children. "Yes, I am. And who are you?" "I'm Sophia. I'm your granddaughter." The world stopped for a second. Sophia, Michael's daughter, born during the darkest months of the family conflict, when I was so submerged in my own survival that I had barely registered I had a new granddaughter in the world. "How did you find me, little one?" I asked my grandma Jessica why she never talked about you, and she gave me your address. "She told me you were a very lonely lady who was mean to my daddy, but I wanted to meet you to decide for myself. The innocence of children to cut through the lies of adults had always amazed me. But at that moment, it took my breath away. And what did you decide? That you have the face of a nice grandma. Not a mean grandma. Can I come in?" I let her in, and as I prepared her a glass of milk and cookies, I watched her explore my apartment with the natural curiosity of someone who still finds magic in new spaces. She stopped in front of the photographs I had hung in the living room. Pictures from my recent trips to Savannah and Asheville. Photos from the pottery class I had started taking. Portraits of the new friends I had made in my library book club. "Do you live alone?" she asked. "Yes, sweetie, I live alone." "Don't you get bored?" "You know what? I thought I would be very bored, but I discovered that I really like my own company." Sophia sat on my new sofa, the one I had chosen all by myself, a light blue color because it reminded me of the morning sky. "My daddy says you don't love us." Her words were direct, without malice, with the brutal honesty only children can manage without causing harm. "And what do you think?" "I think if you didn't love us, you wouldn't have been sad when we left. And my daddy looks very sad since we stopped talking to you." This little girl's wisdom completely disarmed me. For months, I had built emotional walls to protect myself from the pain of family betrayal, but this tiny person had breached all my defenses with a simplicity that reminded me why being a mother had been worth it in the first place. "Sophia, do you know what happened between your daddy and me?" "I know there was a very bad fight. My daddy says you changed and became selfish. My grandma Jessica says you were crazy and that's why you went to court. But my teacher says that when grown-ups fight a lot, usually everyone is a little bit right and a little bit wrong. Your teacher is very wise. Are you a little bit wrong?" The question hit me like a stone in still water, creating ripples that reached the depths of my soul. For months, I had been so focused on my own justification, on proving I was right, that I had avoided examining whether I had also contributed to the destruction of my relationship with my son. Yes, little one. I was wrong, too. About what? About confusing love with money for a very long time. About teaching your daddy that my affection could be bought by having his needs met, instead of teaching him that my love was free and unconditional. About being so good at giving him everything he wanted that he never learned to value what he had. Sophia drank her milk thoughtfully, as if processing concepts too complex for her age, but intuitive enough for her heart. "But you're not angry with him anymore?" "I'm not angry, Sophia. I'm sad. But I'm also at peace." "Can you be sad and at peace at the same time?" "Yes, my love. You can be sad for what was lost, but at peace for having done the right thing." The little girl stayed with me for 2 hours, telling me about school, her friends, and the stories she liked to read. She didn't mention her father or the family conflict again. She simply existed with me in the present, with no emotional baggage, no hidden agenda, no needs beyond companionship and cookies. When she left, she hugged me with the spontaneity of someone who hasn't yet learned to ration affection. "Can I come back and visit?" "Whenever you want, little one. As long as your parents give you permission. And if they don't give me permission, then we'll wait until you're older and can decide for yourself." After she left, I sat on my terrace, watching the city lights turn on one by one. I thought about all the decisions I had made over the last few months. The house sold, the family lost, the solitude chosen, the dignity reclaimed. I didn't regret any of it. But Sophia's visit had reminded me that family relationships are complex, that love and betrayal can coexist in the same heart, that justice doesn't always bring complete healing. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to Michael, not to Susan, not to Jessica. A letter to myself, for the woman I had been and the woman I had become. Dear Grace of the past, for 43 years, you were a mother before you were a woman. You gave so much of yourself that you forgot you deserved to receive too. You confused sacrifice with love, need with worth, dependence with family. I don't judge you for that. You did what you thought was right with the information you had at the time. Dear Grace of the present, you have learned that being alone is not a punishment, but a choice. That real love isn't bought with bank transfers or begged for with sacrifices. That dignity is worth more than company. That self-respect is more important than the approval of others. You have learned that you can be a good mother without ceasing to be a whole woman. You have learned that to still be the owner means to be the owner of your truth, your decisions, your inner peace, your right to say no without explanation, and yes without apology. Dear Grace of the future, I don't know what destiny holds for you. Maybe Michael will mature and learn to value what he lost. Maybe not. Maybe you will find a new family and deep friendships, in neighbors who become chosen siblings, in a grandchild who grows up and decides to know you for herself. Or maybe you will live alone until the end, but being completely yourself. Either way, you will be free. And that, dear Grace, is the only thing that truly matters. I folded the letter and put it in my jewelry box, next to the 5 words written by the old man in the park, which remained my daily mantra. Outside, Chicago continued its eternal rhythm, full of families who loved and hurt each other, of mothers learning to set boundaries, of children who grew up and understood too late the value of what they once had. But I was no longer a part of those dramas. I had found my own rhythm, my own peace, my own definition of family. I poured myself another glass of wine, raised a toast to the photograph of Richard I had placed in my new living room, and whispered to the stars beginning to appear in the sky. To all the women who one day discover they don't need permission to be happy. That night I slept deeply, dreaming of gardens where I walked alone but never lonely, where every flower I touched bloomed a little brighter, where my own company was enough to fill any space. And you, who have listened to this story to the end, have you experienced something similar? Do you know someone who has had to choose between their dignity and family approval? I would love for you to share your experience in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Because maybe, just maybe, this message will reach someone who needs to hear that it's okay to choose yourself, that it's okay to say enough, that it's okay to be the owner of your own life. Because as that wise old man in the park taught me, you are always, always still the owner of everything that truly matters.